So I'm actually going to tag team with Katie Summers today. So Katie works for our Cruelty Recovery Center, and she's going to do the second half. So I'll let her introduce herself further when we get there. But yeah, just to introduce myself, I'm Elise Gingrich. I'm one of the veterinarians with our Shelter Medicine Services department at the ASPCA. And so that department is a group of shelter medicine veterinarians that interacts with all of our programs across the country. And one of the pieces that I do a lot of is support for our various foster programs. So what I wanted to do first was just kind of give a quick overview of our various foster programs, because being a large national organization, we have a number of programs and they're all a little bit different. So I'm not going to get into kind of the org structure of each of them, because that would take the whole meeting. But just to kind of give you the quick highlights of them, that'll help then when we talk a little bit about really using rounds to improve the care of animals that are in the foster program. So we have three main foster programs within the ASPCA. The first is at our adoption center and kitten nursery, which is in New York City. And that's, I think, usually the kind of the, maybe not the foster program itself, but our adoption center in New York City is what most people think of when they think of ASPCA. And this is probably the closest to what I'll call quote unquote traditional sheltering, in that we have an adoption center and a kitten nursery, which are right next to each other. And most of the animals come into either of those programs through transfers. I mean, we work pretty closely with ACC in New York City, so take a lot of animals from them. Also do some other transfers from other rescue partners or organizations that we work with. And then also, particularly on our adoption center side, we take in animals from community engagement type of cases. We do very few true owner surrenders, but the kitten nursery does take in strays as well from the public. And our kitten nursery, interestingly, was originally set up kind of like what you think of as a kitten nursery, big space that we're holding the kittens. And over the last 2 years has really shifted to more of a foster-based program, so that this last year, I think it was close to 90% of the kittens went into foster, and didn't remain in the kitten nursery for the duration of their stay. The ones that did were older ones, so probably you're closer to like 7-8 weeks, that maybe were just underweight, needed a little bit of help to get to that point when they could go into the adoption program. One of our other programs is our Pee-wee program in LA, and this one is probably closer to a rescue organization that doesn't have a brick and mortar building. Because that's exactly what the Pee-wee program is. It was initially started as a diversion program for kittens coming into the county shelters in LA, at 2 of the care centers in particular that had some of the highest euthanasia rates for kittens, just really based solely on numbers. There were just more kittens coming in than they could place. So we started a foster program out there about 6 years ago now, I think. And so that's, just like it sounds, the kittens come into the county shelter, and then we have some mobile units on site at 2 of the shelter locations, and any of the kittens that can meet the criteria for this program are then funneled to our Pee-wee program and go into foster and remain in foster until they're old enough to be, obviously be spayed and neutered and put up for adoption. And then at that point, they typically move to any of a variety of our rescue partners that we work with, or sometimes directly into adoption centers at PetSmart, Petco, that kind of thing. And then probably the most unique foster program we have is what Katie's going to get into a little bit more, but that's at our Cruelty Recovery Center, which is in Ohio. And this is the shelter that any of the case animals from large, either disaster response or like hoarding and cruelty cases that we deal with, any of the animals from those cases, once they're able to leave the state of origin, usually they have to stay there sometimes because of disease issues, but once those are cleared and they can travel, they come to Ohio. and they're, vetted and go through their medical and behavior evaluation. And then, we determine what care they need. But because of the type of cases, almost all of these guys are on some kind of legal hold. And as any of you know that work with court cases, these can drag on. In some of these cases, literally for years. So obviously we are not wanting to keep those animals in the shelter for that length of time. So they started a foster program. And I will say that this program there's a lot of reorganization within this particular area over the last year and a half. And so right now, these animals are kind of spread out throughout the country. A lot of that is because of the foster piece develops after the response piece, and we realized, hey, these animals need somewhere to go. So a lot of our initial fosters were responders, those people that came out to help with the disaster response or the hoarding response. And when we realized these animals need to go to foster, these responders stepped up and said, hey, I'll help out. But that created its own challenges because, like I said, they're spread throughout the country. There are plans to shift that and develop a more centralized foster around the shelter in Ohio. But like I said, with all the reorganization lately, that's still coming. So that hasn't been developed yet. But what I'm going to talk about briefly before Katie gives an example of how we use this foster rounds is just this round system. And this is something that a lot of you are probably familiar with. Either maybe your organizations are doing it like at a population level in the shelter building itself, or maybe you're doing some form of this for your foster program already. But I really, I think it's something that benefits a lot of organizations, and it looks really different. You make it work for your organization, but I think it's really important to have some kind of touch point for all of these animals that are out in foster care. I'd say especially for these animals, because I think sometimes what can happen is, they're out of sight, out of mind. And so sometimes we get busy with other things and maybe we forget about some of those animals and they get a little bit lost in the system, or, we forget to check on them until something does happen and all of a sudden, it blows up and it's an emergency. So foster rounds are really a way to help prevent some of those things from happening. So like I said, it's very similar to population rounds that you may already be doing. And obviously in this case, your population is just those animals in foster. And one of the important pieces is to make sure that you have regular meeting frequency. And again, this is what works for you and your program. Some of our programs, like our LA program, they meet once a week to touch base on the fosters. Some of them meet every other week. Again, it really just depends how often you need to talk about these animals. And a lot of that depends on how quickly they're moving through your system. One of the other big pieces to think about, if you're not doing this already, or maybe if you are and you're trying to streamline it, is to think about who you need to be involved. Because there's always that fine line of getting the voices involved that you need to be there to make decisions, but not having so many that, everybody starts talking and it, what's supposed to be, a half hour meeting, becomes twice as long. So, in my mind, it's looking at who are those key players. So it's obviously somebody from your foster program, perhaps somebody from, medical or veterinary services, depending on what kind of animals you have in foster, maybe somebody from behavior, and then somebody from kind of the operations side. And so placement might be separate, or maybe you need an additional person, kind of depends what your structure looks like. But finding out who those people are and bringing them in. And then really the process, and this is how we look at it, both for our foster rounds as well as shelter population rounds, is that for each animal, we ask 4 questions. And that might, if you're not doing this already, it might sound like a lot. And honestly, probably the first couple of times you do it, it might take a little while, but once you get going and you're doing it regularly, a lot of these things you'll see you can go through pretty quickly. But kind of the 4 questions that we try and answer with each rounds for each animal is, who are you? And that's as simple as it sounds, like, hey, this is Charlie and he's, 13-year-old neutered male bulldog and has X, Y, and Z going on. And then just asking, how are you? Is there anything new that's come up that we need to know about? And just checking in on their pathway plan. Are they, are we still on track to, we had planned to put him up for adoption. Are things still looking good? Is that still the route we can go, or do we need to reevaluate things? And probably the most important question is figuring out, what do you being the animal, what do you need from us today? And the answer may be nothing, which is great, but then at least you know that. But it may be that, no, things aren't looking good. We're having behavior concerns. So let's set them up with one of our behaviorists, that kind of thing. And then perhaps the most important piece, I think, is the follow-up. So making sure that everybody leaves those rounds knowing what their responsibilities are, so who's following up on Charlie and making sure that the connections are made with the behaviorist, who is making sure surgeries get scheduled, that kind of thing, and recording it. Because as a veterinarian, I always say, if it's not written down, it didn't happen. And I think we've all been in those meetings too, where, you all talk about things and things are great, but if nobody takes notes, 2 weeks later, you're circling back around and saying, what did we talk about? And trying to figure it all out. So that's rounds in a nutshell. And I will let Katie introduce herself a little further and kind of give you an example of how we use that rounds process at our Cruelty Recovery Center in Ohio.
Thanks, Dr. Gingrich. Hi, everybody. My name is Katie Summers. I'm the Senior Manager for Foster and Placement at the ASPCA Cruelty Recovery Center, which is located in Columbus, Ohio. We house animals from non-criminal cases all the way through cruelty and neglect seizures. So I'm excited to be here today with you just to tell you a little bit about our process with foster rounds. So, like everyone on this call, the past year has presented us with both challenges and opportunities. One of those opportunities was we are really getting the chance to look at our protocols and processes internally. And we realized that a gap, that we had internally with the CRC was in the area of our foster population and how we were sort of tracking foster questions and concerns regarding medical and behavioral follow-up. As well as a process for elevating the quality of life concerns that we saw to our outcome panel. So thus Foster Rounds was born. Dr. Gingrich was a huge part of putting this in place. So I'm very grateful to you for that. I was hired as staff at the very start of Foster Rounds. So we've been able to really shape and grow this process, which has been wonderful. So what we have done, we've created an internal protocol that outlines key players, meeting guidelines and agenda, as well as follow-up protocols. So the required participants that we have are the leader, which is the Senior Manager of Foster and Placement, so myself. I just make sure that the meeting runs smoothly and that we are discussing every animal that needs to be discussed, efficiently during that time. We have a shelter veterinarian, someone from our behavior team, as well as our administrative manager, who is a scribe for us. We invite key stakeholders as needed to our meetings, or they can also request to come to our Foster Rounds meetings. And as Dr. Gingrich pointed out earlier, what's very different about our foster program is that most, if not all, of the animals that are in foster through the CRC at any given time are considered evidence in active criminal investigations. So when we do a criminal neglect or cruelty case, oftentimes the prosecutor will allow us the opportunity to put some of those animals from the case into foster while the court goes through their process. And those animals can be in foster anywhere from 2 months all the way to, we have animals in foster that have been in foster for 5 years. So it's really important for us to stay on top of the needs of the animals in foster, especially those who have been in foster for many years, who are getting older, who have a lot of medical and behavioral needs. And then as well for just legal accountability reasons, we really need to keep track of what's going on with our fosters who are considered in witness protection. So because of this, depending on the animal and the specific case that we're discussing in Foster Rounds, key stakeholders are invited or can come on board. And those include folks from, our forensics team, legal advocacy investigations, relocation, placement, et cetera. So those are key stakeholders. And then in preparation for rounds, we hold our rounds every other Thursday. Required participants indicate which animals they'd like to discuss during rounds via an Airtable, which I'll show you a quick demo of in a moment. And then I look at the Airtable and I add that information to our agenda, which is in box notes. And that's accessible by all parties. And I have a sample of our box note agenda on a slide, which I will show you after the quick Airtable demo.
Sorry, Katie, let me get that pulled up.
Oh, you're fine. Yeah, no worries. So while Dr. Gingrich is bringing up the Airtable, I just wanted to, add that you can actually utilize Airtable for all of your foster rounds notes. You don't have to have them in a separate folder like we do with our box notes. But after utilizing the Airtable spreadsheet for us internally for a couple of months, our team felt like we needed a little bit more of a succinct snapshot of these animals. And again, these guys have been in foster, many of them for many years, and have a lot of background medically and behaviorally. So we found it really helpful for our team to just have everything in one box note. But if you're fosters, if you like Airtable and you have fosters that are in more of a temporary situation, it's very easy to add notes to them. So this is our Airtable. So I'm doing a demo with one of our dogs, Blondie, who is actually currently up for adoption. Just for, again, most of our animals are case animals. So for confidentiality, I'm just going to show you Blondie. And you can see here that we have, Blondie's ID number, her case number, current status. So she was in board and train. She's actually, like I said, she's currently in foster, has an adoption application. We're very excited for Blondie. The reason for foster placement. So if it's behavior, if it's a case reason or a medical reason, that all gets put under the reason for foster. And then most importantly is if you kind of see over to the right, it says discuss in rounds and it's marked as yes for follow-up. So what we do is our behavior team and our medical team will go in here, and if they would like to discuss an animal in rounds, they will click on either yes medical, yes behavior. If it's an animal like Blondie, who we've had several conversations about, it will be yes follow-up. If there's a foster scenario that I'm working with and I'd like to bring that animal to our rounds, I'll put, I'll mark it as yes for other. And then I'm able to come into our Airtable and see what all of the teams have marked. So any animals that are marked for rounds that week, I will go ahead, go into Airtable, grab their information, and then I will put it into an agenda in our box note. So I'll just do a quick, I'll show you that quick box note. And that's on your PowerPoint, Dr. Gingrich. Yeah, perfect. Yep, so this is just a really quick overview. So in box, we have this running foster rounds agenda for 2021 now. Under the date of foster rounds, you'll see all of the participants. I require that the participants have to log into this box note during rounds and check themselves as present. So it helps us with meeting accountability, who's there. Then I will go through and share the agenda items at the beginning of the meeting, and we leave all other topics until the end. We start in immediately on individual animals. That's obviously our top priority. And then you'll see we actually highlight or bold the current notes for that day's meeting. So our scribe, our administrative manager, will write notes under that 128 group follow-up. And then we're also able to see under there, you'll see 114 group follow-up, and then the notes kind of run from there. So you're able to see a really good snapshot of all the other discussions that our team has had about Blondie. And then on the far right, you'll see actions and next steps. So following our foster rounds meeting, the administrative manager will send out an email to all of the required participants with action items, so follow up. And then we ask that, us as participants, we log back into this box note as our action items are completed, and that we go ahead and check them off. And then the process repeats itself. So I know this is a really kind of high level overview. Like Dr. Gingrich said, we could talk about foster rounds for hours and the intricacies of how we run these, but I hope that, I was able to give you kind of a good snapshot of what we do at the CRC. And yep, there's our email addresses if you have any questions or, want any further intel. So I appreciate your time. Dr. Gingrich, was there anything else to add or?
No, but I did see there were like two questions that popped up in
Oh, cool.
chat, and I kind of hit on them a little bit, but just there was a question about explaining the approval process that you go through to get government entities to agree to allow certain dogs to go into foster homes. How's the government decide which are approved to go into foster homes? And I can start, and Katie, if you have anything to add, please do. But so my understanding, yeah, it's not a simple process, and I will say it's one of the sometimes benefits of being part of a really large organization. We have a whole legal department, and that's what they do. So they are the ones that work with the prosecutors on the case. And they come to us being those of us like Katie in the foster program, myself in medical, or the veterinarian at the CRC, to help them craft. Usually it's some kind of letter that, why we're requesting that these animals go into foster. And I think you guys can figure that out pretty quickly. We give them lots of reasons why, for the animal's health and well-being, it does not make good sense. It's not in their best interest to keep them in a kennel for, even with really good enrichment, it's not good to keep them in a kennel for months to years on end. And so then honestly, we turn that over to legal, and then they're the ones that talk with the prosecutor, whoever it is, with the case, and they work, they discuss with like the defense attorneys and determining how that works. So I don't know anything more, Katie. I don't know if you have any more specifics to add, but okay. And then deciding which ones are approved to go into the foster homes. I will say, I think that is a little bit more on us. And that really comes from, for us, it's both medical and behavior, but I will say we weigh behavior a lot more heavily. Honestly, we want to make sure that these animals are safe. That's our biggest issue. And because we do a lot of, I shouldn't say a lot, but we do dog fighting cases. So obviously, as you can imagine, a lot of those animals are not safe to put into foster homes. So that's where we rely heavily on our behavior team, and there are lots of discussions internally. And then essentially we come up with that list, and then we give that list to our legal department and say, these are the ones we would like to send to foster. Can we do that? And then there was a second part. Oh, can these animals be adopted before the case is closed? That's Katie, you might have more insight, because I know this came up when I was helping with the CRC a little bit more regularly. My understanding is in the past they have done that once or twice. The problem is it becomes really tricky when you're trying to send these animals out that are still legal evidence from a purely legal standpoint, and adopting this out and, essentially telling a person, hey, okay, we're going to adopt it to you. But guess what? There's this slight possibility that if the court comes back and says we lost and we have to give the animals back, you have to give the animal back. So that's where it becomes really, really tricky. And my understanding is that's why they've hesitated looking into doing that. It's tough because we want to get these animals into homes. I will say, because these fosters are fostering for so long, like Katie said, we have animals that have been in foster for years. Honestly, they become almost like owners, and they become so attached to these animals that we feel really good, obviously, that they're getting the best care that they can, and these fosters are treating them like, really like it's one of their own pets.
Yeah. And we actually, with these case animals, we have our fosters sign legal agreements. And we can't, for our animals in particular, we can't adopt them out until we have been granted ownership of the animal. And so it's a tough spot to be in as a foster. I mean, I have an animal from one of these cases that has been ongoing for 4.5 years, and it's tough because you feel like the animal is yours. But there is always the possibility that, the court case goes through and you do have to return to owners. So it's a really delicate process for us at the CRC to have those conversations with our fosters. It's hard, but you always hope for the best. So.